I'm Abdul Razak from Global Frontiers, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's webinar, which is the role of AI in HR, shaping tomorrow's workforce. This event is co-hosted by Global Frontiers, People's HR, Satellites Incorporation, and ADP Advisory, all the way from Tanzania. Our goal today is to deliver into the profound impact AI having on HR practices and strategies. We are fortunate to have two distinguished experts joining us today, Mr. Lakshya Logan and Tarvinder Puri. So let me give a brief intro on Lakshya Logan. He's the Vice President of Global Sales at People's HR, bringing us over 18 years of leadership experience building successful high-performing team across multiple international companies. His experience in Asia Pacific region, Middle East, and African region as well. Recently, he provided valuable insights on HR compliance at IHR in Kenya, annual HR Congress in Mombasa, and at GITEX in Morocco as well. And a little bit on Tarvinder Puri. She is the Managing Director of ADP Advisory Services in Tanzania, has over 25 years of international HR experience. Her expertise spans developing high performance teams, career strategy, consulting, and workplace wellness. With proven track record in aligning HR practices with business strategies, Tarvinder insights on the employee's life cycle and workplace culture will be invaluable. So let's start on to the presentation. I will hand over to Mr. Lakso. So during the webinar, you all are free to drop any kind of questions while in the presentation in the chat section, and we will be happy to assist you. So Mr. Lakso, over to you.
Thank you, Abdul. Welcome, everyone. So we're here to talk about AI in HR. So what I thought I would do to begin things off is to just talk about what exactly is AI, and more importantly, how does it apply to the world of HR? Normally, when I speak to a number of HR professionals or even any business professionals for that matter, when I talk about AI, I have a range of different answers. But most recently, when I talk about AI, most people are thinking about the latest applications such as ChatGPT or any other generative AI. But the truth of the matter is that AI is not really new, and it's actually not new to HR. So let me kind of break down in terms of what AI is and how we got here, so we're all aligned and we're on the same page. But for those of you who've been using technology such as Netflix, Spotify, you'll notice that a number of times that you use it, often recommendations are being made in terms of what you may be interested in watching or maybe interested in listening to. Now, effectively, that's AI in the background working. And what it really is the first layer of AI, what we call is machine learning. Now, machine learning, effectively, all it is looking at a series of data. And once you use a series of data, you'll notice there are patterns in that data. And so with the pattern of data comes a very likelihood or a scenario that's about to come. So with that vast amount of data, you can make predictions. And so that's essentially what machine learning is all about. You go one step further, and this is where it gets really interesting. And this is how technologies such as generative AI and other ChatGPT technologies have also been formed. And this is what we call deep learning. And so what ends up happening is the technology becomes smarter. It starts learning from errors and mistakes. It starts looking at anomalies, things that are happening, that don't happen as often, that should be also taken into consideration. And so what ends up happening is technology starts learning and it gets better over time. And so that's essentially where we are when it comes to AI. But more importantly, how does this apply to HR? So there are a number of different functions that AI can be applied to when it comes to AI. And so if you think about the number of functions that are out there, such as recruitment, onboarding, learning and development, performance management, succession planning, experience management, all of this can be applied to using AI technologies. And without you maybe realizing it, you probably may be using it today. But what I want to intentionally share with you today is just a few functions where AI has really kind of taken off when it comes to some of these key functions or key modules when it comes to HR. So namely today, what I'm going to be focusing on is recruitment, onboarding, and learning and development. And we'll talk about how we can all bring this together when it comes to some of the other assets of when it comes to AI. But an interesting statistic that came out of Gartner not too long ago. And so this whole buzz around AI is really taking form. In fact, 76% of HR leaders believe that their organizations believe if they do not adopt or implement AI technologies, such as generative AI in the next 12 to 24 months, they'll be far behind or lagging behind their competitors. And that number is actually higher when you start speaking to the C-suite. So it just tells you how much and how often people are thinking when it comes to AI, when it comes to their organizations. And the reality is it's not just related to Tanzania or Kenya or Africa, but this is global. And so the numbers do vary slightly, but we can all agree that the percentages are in favor of if we don't apply AI in our business, we're going to be far behind in regards to the market. And the early data that we've seen in reports such as from McKinsey and PwC have actually indicated that the ones who have actually adopted the technologies earlier are showing tangible bottom line results that are far significantly higher than those who are not yet able to adopt technologies. So this is why it's significantly on people's mind today. So let's talk about the key functions here. We spoke about recruitment, onboarding, and learning development, which I'll talk about now. But let's talk about recruitment in terms of how AI has been applied to the recruitment function. Now, again, this is nothing new. So if you look at technologies today, such as LinkedIn, some of the technologies out there, such as Monster.com or JobsDB, if you're in Asia, a lot of times you can actually use the technology to write out job descriptions. So for those of you who have conventionally used job descriptions to advertise roles, and you've manually entered the information and copied and pasted it from other job descriptions, you'll know that errors do occur. Maybe some biased language may be used in favor of a particular type of demographic or profile which you're looking for, which may be unintentional, but those particular wordings or the way you phrase certain things in your job description could be actually hurting you when it comes to attracting talent. Now, what AI is able to do is take the actual key skill sets of the role, marry that up with what other people are doing that's publicly available, and then putting that into your personalized version of the JD for your organization. So there's some really, really cool things you can do today. And this is all readily available if you're using technology such as ChatGPT. So it doesn't stop there. So here's a fun fact for you. So for those of you who are actively going out and seeking candidates that may be passive, who may not be necessarily actively looking for roles, where you can't just depend on a job ad to attract talent, there's a great way you can use generative AI and AI technologies to actually craft personalized messages to candidates. So I can't tell you how often I see recruiters or HR professionals that may take a very generic statement or generic message and go out and target candidates. So like with all sort of campaigns, if you do that, it's going to stick with some, and the majority of people are going to completely ignore that message. But with generated AI, you can actually personalize the messaging based on that particular individual's wants, needs, what they're actually posting on particular social medias, what they're doing, how they've interacted with you, and then craft a more personalized message. Now, what the research tells us is when you do that, the response rates are significantly higher than those who are just using generic messages. And that leads to high conversion rates, more people you could speak, more people in your talent pipeline, ultimately you finding talent much sooner rather than later. So some really, really cool things you can do with the technology. But what about applicant screening? So you've gone and posted a job, you've gone out and reached out to people, you've attracted a great long list or maybe short list. Now, how do you start going through the screening process to ensure that you're getting the right type of people responding to the roles? Now with AI, and if those of you are already using applicant tracking systems today, probably this is not new to you because this has been around for a while. But now the technology has become so good, You can now analyze resumes, pick up certain discrepancies, pick up things that may be of interest to the company based on statements, phrases, paragraphs in their resume, and then make recommendations whether this person is a good person to recruit or maybe someone you probably want to put bottom on the list. But now I've seen technologies nowadays, what they can do, and this includes technologies such as People's HR, where they can start stack ranking applicants based on how suitable they are for the particular position, which is a phenomenal way of just saving time for recruiters and saving time for HR professionals. And again, the sooner you hire, the sooner you get people to the role, the sooner the more productive you are, the better it is for the organization. So what happens after you go through that first round of screening and now you're starting to do the interviewing process? This is a really cool thing now what AI has been able to do for us as an organization. You think about the time you're spending with an applicant, maybe you're allocating 30 minutes, 45 minutes. If you're fortunate to spend 1 hour to go through a first screen of an interview, there's only so much information you can generally get from a person. It happens so quickly. What about things that you may have missed out or maybe detected, such as subtle facial cues, gestures, body language that may have given away more than actually what they've actually said in response? So what the technology now has been able to do is able to screen candidates and find out whether, based on the response, whether the tone of language they use, maybe a sudden gesture or a blink, maybe some ease or uncomfort, maybe that person may be telling something that may not have been truthful, maybe something that may have been not in line to what they actually shared, which then allows you to have more information to then further drill down to those questionings of that person that may have kind of found it a little bit difficult or challenging to maybe answer, or maybe find that intel or information that may be passed on to the next person in the recruitment process. But either way, you're getting more information about that person and you're identifying areas that may be of something to be concerned about, or maybe something that's good for the organization, given that the confidence and the certainty they shared in terms of the way they delivered a particular message or response to your question. But it's become that good to pick up these little subtle cues in terms of the way people respond to questioning. Now, why is this all important? Because at the end of the day, right, you need to get talent on board. You need them to be productive. The sooner they are, the sooner they are providing and, giving you returns for your organization. But did you know if this is not done correctly, if this is not done in the process where the onboarding is done correctly, then you have a bigger problem in hand. And the research and the data tells us that as well. So here's a really interesting sort of study and some statistics that were taken from Business News Daily. So what it found out was when they had the wrong person that came into the organization, or if they didn't go through the entire process on onboarding the new hire correctly, what ends up happening is those first 6 months are critical for any new hire. And so if it's not done correctly or you've hired the wrong person, ultimately that leads into employee turnover. Now you think about what that means to your organization, the time you spent to go out and find that person, the time you spent, as well as the other additional people who went through the recruitment process to hire that person, the time lost that you could have been speaking to other candidates, the time you spent to train that person, to enable that person to do their job. And all of a sudden they leave in 3 to 6 months, that's a complete loss. And then you need to go through the whole process again. So what the data tells us is that can be anywhere between 100% to 300% of that employee's salary. So you're better off making sure you do that right. Take a little bit of time to make sure that you're speaking to the right type of people, using the technologies to help you make more informed decisions and helping that person on board correctly and as successfully as possible. Otherwise, it could lead to more consequential and more costly mistakes for you and the organization. So this is sort of a nice tie-in when it comes to learning and development, because ultimately what we've now learned through experience, especially during our time during COVID, how do we keep our folks engaged? How do we ensure that we're retaining the right type of people? And how do we ensure that the people that we do have are developing throughout their careers in your organizations? So typically what I've seen a number of organizations do, they build a great L&D plan. and roll it out for the organization. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a great start. But as we all know, people are different. People have different requirements. And not only that, during the stage of which they are in their career within your organization, the requirements and needs are also different. So think about a person that has just joined the organization. What type of learning and development would they need? Think about someone who's just come back from maternity leave. What would they need to do to go through some of those development training programs in order to kind of speed up as part of their transition back into the workforce? Think about someone who's now been promoted into a leadership role. Think about someone who's probably gone through a pretty poor experience in the organization and needs to kind of shift into maybe a new function or new responsibility. What would they need? What would they require? So everyone has a different skill set, right? Requirement as part of their development in the organization. Now, what AI can do is now learn based on the behaviors of that particular that individual, how they've interacted with other individuals in the company, other past training programs, how does that tie in terms of performance, what have they contributed to the company, and that all ties in terms of recommendations in terms of what is the most suitable training program for that individual. Again, so when you're tailoring these programs to the person specifically, you are higher likely to make sure that you retain these people and ensure that they are more productive in your organization. So how do we kind of bring this all together? So we spoke about the recruitment, we spoke about onboarding, we spoke about the learning and development piece. But then how do we kind of bring this all together? So the technology now allows us to take data, and the key here is data. So you may remember the whole premise of AI was machine learning in terms of the amount of data you can use and the patterns you can get out of the technology and then make predictions. So what effectively now the technology is allowed us to do is taking data sources from essentially every depository within your HR ecosystem, whether it be recruitment, onboarding, learning, payroll, performance management, benefits, whatever it may be, is when you're taking a bit of the data from every source, all of a sudden now AI, machine learning, deep learning can start making recommendations in terms of where the company should actually next go. This is really useful in ensuring that you're optimizing your cost. So if you're going through a process of hiring certain people, it's taking amount of time, it's taking amount of a sort of cost associated with it. Where are some of the areas you can actually streamline that and make it a little bit better? Think about the times in terms of people, in terms of how they perform, the type of emails they're sending, how they're engaging with your customers. How do you use that data then to ensure that you're paying the people the right way? How do you incentivize these people? How do you ensure that you're setting the right KPIs? So again, most of the time, we as organizations, we set these KPIs, we set these sort of key metrics based on generic data or based on past history in terms of what we've done. But now, as organizations are moving so rapidly, market conditions are moving so quickly as well. How do we quickly keep abreast of all that, ensure that we're changing to adapt to the changing landscape? And so then what the technology is allowing us to do is ensuring that we can quickly make changes, we can adapt to what the market conditions are asking us to do, and then in turn make those changes with regards to employees and making sure that we can then be better hirers, better employers, and ensure that we are making sure we're attracting the right type of talent, but more importantly, we're retaining the people that we do have in the organization. So before I wrap up, I thought I'd just leave with you my 2 cents in terms of how to adopt AI tools, because often I get asked the question, Lakshay, this is fantastic, this is great, but where do I start? There's so much out there at the moment. There is so much information out there. What do I do? How do I kind of use this to the best of my ability? Remember the earlier statistic from Gartner, more than 76% of organizations believe they don't have the right tools, or they don't believe if they don't have AI in place, they're going to fall behind. So one thing I would strongly recommend is making sure that you're very clear in terms of what you want to start off with. There are many different areas you can apply AI and technologies across your ecosystem when it comes to HR. We spoke about a few of them, but my strongest recommendation is start with 1 or 2 of them to begin with. Going in a big bang approach is going to make things a little bit complicated and challenging for you. Start with 1. be very, very clear in terms of some of the limitations that do come up with AI. It's not 100%. If it was, then I suppose you don't require people at the end of the day. There is still a need for people to get involved, and the technology does have its limitations. And being mindful of the limitations and where people can intervene to make sure that we are thinking outside the box and thinking what's best for the organization rather than letting the machine do that. So if we can recognize that and intervene where it makes sense, that's the start. Remember, AI is very useful when it comes to repetitive tasks. So when it's repetitive, you can automate it. When there are situations where you need to think a little bit strategically, this is where people come into play. Make sure you don't let technology drive every decision. You're going to get yourself into a bit of trouble there. And ensure that you're always prioritizing your data and security of the data. A lot of times, technology, especially AI, will introduce a lot of ways in terms of where they are actually making predictions or interpreting data. When it's open-ended, when it's transparent, that's a good thing. Be careful about technologies that have what we call black box setups, where you don't know how it's making predictions. Ultimately, the technology has been built and trained by people. People have biases, people think a certain way, and that's how the technology learns. So making sure that the technology is transparent and open so that you can see how it's actually working is another thing I would strongly recommend as well. So some of the things to think about, especially when you are thinking very strongly about applying AI in your HR suite of technologies. Now with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass it on to Tarvinder, and what she's going to be talking about is how specifically AI has been applied and how it's transforming HR, specifically in the continent of Africa. Tarvinder, over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot, Luxor, over the past 20 minutes. So thank you for sharing your experiences. And I think you've still got control. So I'm just going to keep talking. And if you don't mind being my co-pilot, I'd really appreciate that. So welcome and thank you all for joining today's session. I'm really excited to share with you my perspective around AI in Africa within the HR context. So AI is a topic that has been merging more and more and is creeping into our lives at a pace which we probably hadn't predicted or anticipated. As Luxor shared, it is creeping into our homes through our television sets, it's popping up on our phones. It is surrounding our everyday existence. And I really see this as a catalyst for change. Remember, organizations exist because they want to increase their efficiency and their productivity. And this is the nature of organizations' existence. So anything that we can do to speed up that process is seen as a positive. Now, I have come across lots of people in life and across the 25 years that I've been in this HR space who are generally skeptical about change. So the nervousness that I'm observing and I'm hearing from people when it comes to AI is nothing out of the ordinary. I think it's part of life's existence. And I think as humans, we feel comfortable and base a lot of our decisions on past experiences as an indicator for future success. So if you ask me where I'd like to go out for dinner, I might suggest an Italian restaurant that I've been to several times before because my experience of that restaurant was really positive and I want to repeat that positive experience. It makes us feel safe, it makes us feel reassured, and it makes us feel really familiar with the decisions we're making. Therefore, you can understand the reluctance of folks opening their arms and embracing AI in the same vein. So it shouldn't really come as a surprise. So let me share with you my observations around HR in the African context, because although I've been operating in human resources for the past 25 years, over the last 9 years, I've had experience of working with organizations across East and West Africa, as well as teams in the North. So I'm going to share with you my perspective of how I have seen HR evolve. So the first thing I want to share is an observation around COVID. And I saw COVID as a real catalyst for change. So the function of HR is already well established in lots of organizations. And I feel over the years, we've made significant inroads in raising the profile of HR and the value that we actually do provide. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic became a catalyst for this even more, because I was observing organizations across the globe reacting to unprecedented changes in the workplace, things they've never, ever experienced before. And organizations were actually looking at HR to step forward and provide guidance through structures, answer many difficult and complex questions as a way to navigate through some of these really unnerving times. How do we respond to, questions such as how do we respond to the pandemic when it comes to medical leave? How do we implement working from home? How do we respond to death in work? Which was a reality for lots of people not too long ago. So HR was seen as a support function, but then very much moving into center stage and playing a vital role in supporting organizations through this complexity. So I saw that transition predominantly across the Western world, where the CEOs were looking at their HR colleagues saying, can you help me? So HR was very much at the forefront. What I observed from the African perspective, and this is where I think there was a slight difference, is my observation in Africa is typically the CEO is the business leader who makes those tough decisions. There I would describe them as the drivers for change. And typically in lots of organizations that I've worked alongside, HR is seen as very transactional. They do as they are told. They're not necessarily strategically impacting the decisions the organization is making. They're in essence carrying out instructions. So the traditional HR support role is the function that we fill. And it's actually the leader who is the driver of that change. Every market is unique and different. That's my ultimate summary of how I observe HR across the globe. Different countries are at different stages of their evolution process. And I think it's very unfair to categorize and generalize Africa as a whole. My experience of dealing with organizations in East Africa and across Ethiopia and Kenya are quite different compared to what I've observed in West Africa, in Ghana. But I think that what that boils down to ultimately is the leadership of those organizations and their ability to manage and navigate through change. So I wanted to share with you, I think this is on the next slide here, that lots of organizations see AI as an opportunity to bridge the gap. Many CEOs that I talk to regularly, people who I'll meet over a coffee, they often talk to me about leadership as you become more senior, becoming even more lonely. So as you rise up in the organization, people are looking at you to fix problems. People are looking at you to have all the answers up your sleeves. And the reality of how we are living today is nobody has all the answers. So in essence, what I'm trying to say is leadership is actually quite lonely. And this is where I think AI can be a friend, can help us to automate some of those everyday tasks and move away from being transactional to give us back the time so we can add value to help shape these strategic conversations. So I see AI as helping us to improve productivity, which, as I referenced earlier, is the reason Organizations exist to increase efficiency, so it will free up your time to think about how you then focus on the strategic direction of your organization. Another area where I see AI supporting leadership in Africa is actually being a trusted advisor. Because in my experience, when I'm working with CEOs and business leaders, they are often very reluctant to share what they don't know, because there is an expectation that senior leaders know everything. So actually, I see AI as a companion, as a support tool to help leaders and organizations to come up with some advice and recommendations around how they might even start those conversations. So it almost becomes your invisible friend, who you don't need to publicize, you need by your side, but can exist to support you. And then I also see AI as providing you a wealth of knowledge, experience, and insight instantaneously. So you don't need to be a subject matter expert and know everything about a recruitment process as a business leader, but what you do need to know are some of the processes involved. You might want to hear about some of the quick wins that you can embed. You might want to brainstorm some creative solutions to bringing talent on board. So those are the ways that I think AI can really support HR organizations and business leaders in Africa to help them increase productivity and efficiency in their day-to-day work. The next slide, please. So these are some of the areas that I think a lot of my peers in the HR space and CEOs are considering when they're thinking about AI. And the biggest question that I often get asked is around data privacy. How, Davinder, can we ensure that the information that we are sharing is going to be handled sensitively and in the most appropriate way when it comes to using AI to provide our solutions? And it's interesting because the response that I often give is, when it comes to data privacy, is we have a change in the way that people are understanding where the data comes from in the first place. So my understanding, and Luxor can correct me if I'm wrong, is the data that you are going to be given is only as correct as the information that you're putting in the first place. So if you are expecting AI to drive conversations around recruitment from a certain demographic, and that's the exclusive data that you'll be using, then the output from that is only going to be limited. So how do you ensure as an organization, if you're looking to use AI, that that information that you're sharing and putting out there is going to be held in the privacy in which you want it to be? The secondary issue that I get concerns about is around confidentiality. So as HR professionals, we tread a very fine line between wanting to be the voice of the people and creating a culture where everybody feels welcome, but also ensuring that the policies and processes that we are recruited to ensure are upheld can sometimes be feeling like we're working at cross purposes. So how do we ensure that the concerns that are raised are going to be held in that same regard as what is being shared? So I think this is not something which is exclusive to AI. I think this is something which very much boils down to the individual. And I've worked in various HR functions across the globe, and I can honestly say the level of confidentiality actually boils down to the integrity of that person. And then finally, the regulatory landscape, which again is a consideration for lots of people. Davinder, how do we ensure that we are staying within the legal parameters when we're applying AI in the workplace? And my response to this is, like with any changes to legislation, we're really going to understand the impact of this as it starts to be played out. As we start to see cases going to employment tribunal, as we start to understand case law being played out in the same way. And I'll give you a real example. In the UK, when there were changes to maternity legislation, although the law had changed, it wasn't until the practical implementation of those legal policies where people raise grievances and concerns, do we see the impact of then laws potentially changing to ensure that we were being fair, transparent, and equal. So in essence, what I'm saying is it's a watch, wait, and see as the regulatory landscape shifts and molds towards these changing times. We will only know more in the future. So those were some of my considerations for embracing AI in the HR space. I think we're okay for the next slide. So how do I see AI within the African HR space? So I honestly think that AI can be your tool. So in a sector where I see there isn't as much exposure to various functionalities, be it talent, be it recruitment, be it onboarding, I definitely think you can use AI as your step up. If I was a young HR professional wanting to really excel in my career, I'd be embracing AI to help give me that understanding of what does it mean. So I'm a HR generalist. That's always been my route. So I know a lot about HR, but what I'm not is a technical specialist. I don't know the ins and outs of a reward strategy. If I wanted to do that for one of my clients, I would go to somebody within my network who is a reward specialist. But what I'm saying is, if I was to give advice to HR professionals, I would say use this AI technology to help you figure out what you want to specialize in. When you're using AI, I'm not saying do it with your eyes closed and jump in with both feet. Understand the landscape within which you're operating. Be mindful of what the legislation is within your country and think about some of the wider implications that it could possibly have. And I also think it's a great way for you to collaborate with other functions to help build your culture across the breadth of your organization. And sharing what you're doing is a quick win for you to bring people into your thinking, sharing your insights, creating an environment where people will want to embrace technology for success. So those are my quick wins around how you can really introduce AI within the African HR space. And again, happy to connect with all of you even after this to share some more, but those were just my top 3 ideas. Okay, I'm ready for the next slide. I think this is over to you now, Abdul.
And thanks, Lakso. This is a wonderful, insightful session. Actually, I learned a lot with both of your experience and knowledge that has been shared. So today, with our attendees that has joined, we have a few questions that has been addressed. So let me hand over the first question to Tarvinder Puri. The question has been addressed by Kennedy David. The question is, don't you think if artificial intelligence is actively adopted in human resources sector could result to people losing their jobs? So we would like to hear from you, Tarvinder, a little about his question and how it
It's
would be.
really interesting that that's always at the forefront of people's minds. It's like, oh, Devinder, we don't want to introduce technology because it is going to take over our lives. And it's really interesting. So let me share with you a funny story. And this is really true. In one of my various jobs that I've had in my career, I was the HR head of HR for a manufacturing company that produced cakes in the UK. And I would often visit this site to talk to the staff. And this was in an area of the UK which had generational employment from the same families. So people working on the production line had worked there. Their children had worked there in the summer holidays. Their mum and dad had worked there. Their grandparents had worked there. So these were factory sites that had evolved for years and years and had kept families in the local community engaged, employed. And it's interesting because when I talk to people who were on the shop floor about their experience of change, and remember, some of these people had worked well into their retirement and had even come back to be casual labor. And their observation was really positive around changes in manufacturing. So they'd seen the evolution of very physically demanding work, where they were having to pick out pieces of cake from the line and put it into boxes. But now they were seeing the evolution of very expensive machinery costing in excess of 20 million coming in and actually changing the way that they were working. And they saw it as a real positive because they could see how much this had benefited the organization in terms of efficiency. They were no longer just servicing customers in the UK. Through this advancement of technology, it allowed them to actually manufacture and distribute in places like Australia, Japan, Canada, which had similar buying patterns. So in answer to your question, and apologies for the long-winded example that I was sharing, but if I can see 3 generational factory workers embracing how technology has helped them in their local communities, I can guarantee that AI is not going to come over and take over the people aspects of all HR, because that's a nigh on possibility. You're always going to need people, because let's be honest, people are complicated. I don't know anybody else that's like me on the planet. I'm sure Luxor doesn't know anybody else that's like him on the planet. We're all very unique. And it's the same in the workplace. Why would we just have one solution to address a people challenge when actually, to Luxor's point, we are moving towards more personalized learning. We're moving towards more personal-centric solutions, which actually require more effort from people. But the systems that AI can support us with will help us with increasing productivity for more of the repetitive tasks. So that's my answer to that question.
Yeah, it's a great
Thank you.
great story. Thank you, Tavinder, for sharing that. So let me kind of share a perspective here as well, everyone. So let me kind of start with probably the pessimistic side for those who are concerned. So if you have a role that is repetitive, you are doing something that is very, monotonous, that's over and over again, repetitive, then yes, there is a risk that AI would replace your role. But I think there's a greater opportunity here. And let me kind of paint it through an example. So I live in Singapore. And so when I would deal with my bank, I would need to walk into a bank. I would need to deal with the teller. I would need to make a transaction, whether it be a deposit or withdraw money. This was maybe 15 years ago. Now, fast forward, I can't think of the last time I walked into a bank because everything is now online with internet banking. So what happened to all those people at the bank, the tellers? So a lot of people think, oh my goodness, they've been all let go. But the interesting thing is none of those people have been let go. In fact, they've even hired more people. And what's happened is the technology has allowed them to become better at their jobs where they can actually do other functions. So where I look at AI, it's actually been an enhancer of helping people become more productive. If anything, it's creating more jobs for people, not reducing the number of jobs. So that's something that I would strongly consider you to think about when it comes to embracing technology such as AI.
Thank you, Mr. Lakso. And we have 2 more questions, and I would like to hand over the second question to Mr. Lakso. That is from Dawood. The question is, what mechanisms or strategies have you put in place so far to bring about AI to transform Africa future career development? Maybe I think Tarvinder also can answer this. So initially, I will give this question to Lakso.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, what mechanisms or strategies have you put in place so far to bring about AI transformation in career development? So I can share with you personally in regards to what People's HR have done. So with regards to a lot of the things that I spoke about with recruitment, onboarding, some of the L&D technologies, we've actually incorporated that in our platform. So we've been fortunate to work with some of the leading organizations in countries such as Uganda, Kenya, as well as Tanzania, and across other countries on the continent of Africa. And so what they've found is that we've actually able to transform the way those HR teams have been able to engage with their customers, being the employees of their organization. One of the largest customers that we have in Africa today is the government of Uganda, where 500,000 people across the entire government are using People's HR to effectively help enhance the way that they do things today. So if you think about what organizations may have traditionally done through using Excel spreadsheets, or doing things very manually, where it's caused them to even do something that's repetitive, which is prone to human error, which has caused them to not be able to retain the right type of talent. All of a sudden now the technologies allow them to be more productive, been more efficient, which allows the HR professionals to focus on what really matters. So a big sort of gripe, if I can call it that, from a number of HR folks that I speak to, not just in Africa, but globally, is that every time I deal with my employees, it's usually for something very mundane, such as, can you share with me the policy of our organization, or what is my leave entitlement, or what is the policy in terms of dress code, as an example. And so all of a sudden now the technology has become so good where it's become what we call self-service driven, where now employees can actually ask the technology, the platform, in the case of People's HR, and get the responses that they need then and there, which is great for HR professionals, because if you can free up that time, they can focus on what really matters, which is thinking strategically, thinking in the way that actually gets the best out of their people, and working with senior leaders to do just that. So it's been a great sort of enhancer, I would say, for HR professionals, not just in Africa, but globally.
Any inputs, Arvinder, from you?
So yeah, I'm just going to reinforce what Luxor said. I mean, it's interesting. I had this similar conversation with a client of mine who's actually based in Tanzania, and their business has evolved significantly over the last 5 years. They've gone from having 3 employees to over 33. And actually, as they brought me in to give them some advice around how do we put some governance in place? How do we build capability? The one thing that was strikingly obvious to me as a HR professional that was missing was having the systems in place, having the processes in place, having policies that exist to direct people where to go, but then also helping them to understand and interpret what we actually mean by that policy. So I'll give you an example. We might say, well, we have a car policy, and this is what it states. You need to have a valid driving license, and you need to take the car when you're not under the influence of any alcohol or drugs, for example. That's what the policy says. So if you came to me as a member of staff and said, Devinder, I want to take the car, I would direct you to the policy, but I would say to you, this is what the rules state. Now, if Luxor decides to breach that policy, and I want to reprimand him for that, it's very easy, because I can say to him, look, this is what the guidelines are. This is the policy as it states, but this is how you interpret it. And what that would do, it also provides absolute clarity, and it takes away that ambiguity of around fairness and equity in the workplace. You're treating Luxor more favorably than you're treating Abdul because you like him more than you like me. So I definitely see having technologies and systems in place, particularly when it comes to policy rollout, as being really impactful. And actually, it gives HR that governance, that backbone that we really need to ensure that we are freed up to talk more about strategic development, what's going to be our strategy for the next 5 years. Because let's be honest, who wants to just do some of the mundane day-to-day transactional? I don't, for sure. And I'm sure I'm speaking for lots of HR people out there. There's a lot more to us than just reviewing CVs.
Great. Thanks, Arvind. And our final question is addressed by Johnson. It's a good question. So a lot of startups are coming up. So the question is, what would you advise a startup in the AI in HR space for the case of Tanzania? So I would hand over this to Mr. Lakso to take over.
So if I understand the question, what would you advise a startup in AI in the HR space? So they're an AI company in the HR space for Tanzania. Is that what the question?
Yes, there is startups. What would you be advise a startup?
Okay, all right. So
There is a lot of startups in Tanzania. Yes. So
okay.
in the AI HR space, for the case of Tanzania, in Tanzania, how do you build up with AI in HR space? That's the question.
Okay, so probably my advice, if I understand the question correctly, is if you're an AI startup or a company that's dabbling in AI and you want to focus in the HR space. So what my recommendation would be is to focus on one area of the HR sphere. HR is a very, very broad subject matter. So we spoke about recruitment, onboarding, learning development, payroll, comp and benefits. There are many different things you can target and tackle when it comes to HR. So if you are a new organization, and especially in the case of Tanzania, my advice would be focus on the area that is the biggest problem statement for companies in Tanzania today. What does that look like today? Does that problem lie with recruitment? Does that problem lie when it comes to paying staff? Does that problem come in terms of retention? Does that come in the form of, promoting, incentivizing? Whatever that may be, is probably find that target audience, that problem statement. And if you can focus your time and energy just becoming really, really good at solving that problem, you've got a product that'll do extremely well, not just in Tanzania, but I believe probably in the rest of the continent. So that would probably be my advice.
Great. Great. And I hope we answered most of the questions, and yet there will be more questions. So thank you, Mr. Mr. Lakso and Tarvinder, for joining us today and giving us an insightful session, sharing your experience, sharing your knowledge. We learned a lot from you all. And yes, if there's more questions, there's a QR code here that you can connect us and check in with us for more. And our emails, our links that has been shared with you all, so you all can get back to us. The recordings will be shared with all the attendees. And for more details, we will keep in touch with you all. So thank you all for joining, and see you in the next webinar. See you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.